The Mini is as youthful as the day Sir Alec Isigonis first sketched its simple lines on a restaurant tablecloth. In 4 decades, it has become an icon. This symbol of irreverence and fun arrived just as the swinging 60s took off. But the Mini's ride is far from over. In an era of ever larger SUVs and over-the-top grand luxury sedans, the Mini bucked the trend. Mini fans have always believed that small is beautiful. Also, it's fun. There is no other car like a Mini. It's a small car at home in a crowded city and equally happy out on the highway. The new Mini was designed to capture the spirit of the classic. It had to be lively, handle well, and be fun no matter where it was driven. The spirit of the Mini goes back to the 1920s. The families who couldn't afford large cars turned to Austin. Eventually, Austin merged with Morris to form the British Motor Corporation, or BMC. The Austin 7 and Morris Bulldog gave way to the Morris Minor. This car was hugely successful. It was rugged, reliable, and inexpensive. Exactly what post-war Britain needed. It helped to get the country back on wheels. These durable cars were designed for urban life. But as congestion increased on London's busy streets, there was a need for an even smaller car to keep things moving. Alec Isigonis, who designed the Morris Minor, had an idea.
The easiest way to win a battle of this sort is to make a car that is so unusual compared with all the other cars around it that it automatically becomes a status symbol.
Isigonis was a brilliant designer. He dived into the task of producing a car with a tremendous amount of interior space in a small package. This had never been done before. He and his team were determined to comfortably pack 4 passengers in a bold, racy car. Their breakthrough idea: placing the engine across the car. The transmission was moved under the engine. Front-wheel drive created a flat floor, providing more interior room. 4-wheel independent suspension with rubber cones instead of steel springs improved the ride and handling. The car had an astonishing amount of room. It had ample seating for 4 adult passengers inside a tiny body. This was revolutionary. The designers were hailed as brilliant. They hoped they'd dreamed up a wonder car. They built a prototype to see if their ideas would work. Once the handmade components were done, the testing began. They converted a nearby airfield into a test track. The prototype was put through a set of trials. Rack and pinion steering gave the car a 30-foot turning circle, good for parking. High-speed tests were set up to see whether the hydraulic brakes stopped the little wheels. Tests over a rough track challenged the new rubber suspension. The test drivers said the cars passed with flying colors. It was time to begin production. The manufacturing was as unconventional as the car. The small bodies were put together in a specially designed jig, not on a moving assembly line. The entire framework was welded together piece by piece. After assembly, the bodies were inspected before painting. It was a slow and meticulous process. The completed sections began to look like a car. It was ready for paint. Every member of the assembly team knew their job. The emblem was bolted on. The speedometer was fitted. Then the radiator grille slipped into place. It was beginning to take shape. The completed little body was ready to be mated with the subframe and engine assembly. Finally, here was something that looked like it might drive. The incredible car had become a reality. It came in two versions, the Austin 7 and the Morris Mini Minor. Now, would anyone want one of their tiny cars? The tension mounted at the company. The press had the first look at the Mini in 1959. No one knew what to expect. It was so unconventional. They were intrigued, but a little mystified. Isigonis was there to answer questions and explain the ideas behind his radical new car. Everyone just wanted to get behind the wheel and see how it handled. The company had set up a private proving ground in Surrey for the press launch. The journalists drove off at timed intervals so that they had plenty of room to test the handling and performance. The staggered starts also avoided collisions between the enthusiastic scribes. The cars jetted away and showed the drivers how much performance was stuffed into this little package. They were surprised to find out how roomy it was and how well it handled. It was hard to get them out of the cars. Their reports were everything the company had hoped for. The Mini was a hit. With a base price of just under $790, production could barely keep up with demand. In 1959, 20,000 cars rolled out of the factory, and by 1962, BMC was turning out over 200,000. It was on its way to becoming a cultural phenomenon. The Mini was perfect for families. Though the smallest four-seater car, it could hold huge amounts of luggage. It seemed to be bigger inside than on the outside. Its size made it great in traffic. But the Mini wasn't just a city car. People found it ideal for getting out of town. While BMC was happy that the Mini was family-friendly, they thought it could also be a racer. They prepared several cars for rallying. These special cars debuted at the Monte Carlo Rally in 1960. They started the rally in Paris and were pitted against Ferrari, Lotus, and other exotics driven by people like Sterling Moss, Phil Hill, John Surtees, and Dan Gurney. The little cars held their own, gripping the road while others spun out. Surprisingly, they handled like sports cars. The drivers had a lot of fun, but the Minis finished far back in the pack. They needed more power to successfully compete. A friend of Isigonis, John Cooper, whose team had just won the World Driving Championship, convinced the company to let him build a Mini designed for rallies. In 1964, the more powerful Mini Cooper S was ready to be raced. He doubled the output of the 34 horsepower engine and the cars started to perform. The first big outing at Monte Carlo turned into a victory. The Mini showed the world it could race. Another win at Monte Carlo followed in 1965. To prove this wasn't a fluke, they won again in 1967. The Mini seemed to be everywhere. Everyone seemed to be in the buying habit, including nuns, airline pilots, flight attendants, and especially pop stars, who found the Minis to be the ideal way to get around. It was the car to have, even if you could afford a Rolls-Royce. The Mini was more than a car. It was a fashion statement, a frame of mind, an icon in the making. Anything seemed possible in a Mini. This series of commercials summed it up. Every Beatle had one. Peter Sellers, Dudley Moore, King Hussein of Jordan, Steve McQueen, and even Enzo Ferrari were taken by Mini Mania. The millionth Mini was made in 1965. The second million followed in 1969. By 1972, over 3 million Minis were roaming the streets of the world. It was a remarkable feat that no one could have predicted. Clearly, the Mini had arrived. The Minis were still burning up the track. Their price and performance made them a popular choice for amateur racing enthusiasts. Anyone could buy a Mini, customize it, and take it racing. Clubs began to form, and fans of this tiny car even began to roll up to the drag strip. It was a way to prove how capable their cars were. The Mini could reach over 100 miles per hour in 13 seconds as it catapulted down the quarter mile. This gave new meaning to the term funny car. But while the guys were revving up the Minis on the track, sales were slumping in the showroom. In a series of consolidations and mergers, BMC became British Leyland, then the Rover Group, and in the process, product development suffered. There was nothing new to sell. The latest management, however, vowed to jumpstart sales and get things moving again. They could rely on the loyalty of Mini owners to keep the car alive, and these fans show their passion every year at the Mini in the Park, probably the biggest event of its kind in the world. Thousands of Mini owners flock to the Cotswolds rolling hills to show off their cars and share their passion. Such a gathering is always a good place to discover all the things you can do to personalize your Mini. Trying out the nearly unlimited number of add-ons is part of the fun of owning one. Sharing Mini gossip is another. In 1994, news of the company's pending sale reverberated through the army of loyalists. That year, BMW acquired the Rover Group, the company that owned the Mini, as well as Land Rover, Rover Cars, and MG. BMW made a huge investment in modernizing the group. In 1996, they promised there would be an all-new Mini for the new millennium. Importantly, it would be built in the UK. There was much concern during BMW's ownership of the Rover Group about what the new Mini would look like. These concept cars appeared at the Geneva Motor Show in 1997 and were billed as the successor to the Mini. While they may have been the very epitome of the modern small car, few were prepared to accept them as a new Mini. They just didn't look and feel right. The Mini Cooper Monte Carlo, another 1997 concept car, was closer to what most thought of as the original Mini. It was named to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the final Mini Cooper victory at Monte Carlo. It was taken to Monaco for the 1997 rally and shown to the press. Many hoped this was an indication of what the new Mini would look like. This would be the first all-new product from the Mini brand since its inception in 1959. The designers and engineers knew they had to get it just right. It had to be a car that would work in the city and also be fun to drive on tight, twisty roads. Passenger safety and comfort was more of a concern with the modern Mini than it was originally. They used advanced computer design tools and showed how far we'd come since the days when Issigonis sketched the first one. He could only imagine what his finished drawings would look like. Today, designers can see 3D renderings on their desktops and change them with a click of a mouse. But all of the new technology was no insurance that they'd get it right. It will be up to the public to deliver the verdict. While the designers worked on the next generation of Minis, the fans celebrated the 40th anniversary of the car. Thousands of people poured into the Silverstone race circuit to salute their favorite icon. It was a bittersweet funfest. This was the last hurrah, and everybody was determined to have a good time. Anything and everything that one could do in a Mini was tried. Every size, shape, color, and type of Mini was there. Not all were cars. There are very few cars or products in the world that spark this level of enthusiasm. But maybe that's a good thing. We can probably only handle so much chaos and enthusiasm. It was hard to believe that an era was about to end. While the fans celebrated, the last classic Minis were being built. BMW had poured billions of dollars into reviving the rest of Rover, but couldn't make it work. They'd owned it since 1994, but in the spring of 2000, they cut their losses. They decided to keep the one brand they believed had a future. They held on to Mini and sold Land Rover to Ford. The rest of the assets, including the factory, was sold to a new company for just £10. The new company was called MG Rover Limited. Part of the deal was that the production of the old Mini had to cease before the end of 2000. BMW didn't want a competitor for their new car. The original still had a following. Finally, the day arrived. On October 1st, 2000, the last classic Mini rolled out of the Longbridge factory. At the wheel, British pop star Lulu. A reminder of its connection with the flowering of the London music scene. The press gathered to record the event. And another 60s cultural icon was there to share the moment, Twiggy.
My first car was a Mini. I was 19 years old, 1969. I learnt to drive, and the obvious choice was a Mini because they were my favourite cars. They were perfect for London and, you know, traffic and parking. And they made me a special one. I had a purple, dark purple one. It was beautiful with black tinted windows. It was always a cool car to have. I mean, even pop stars who earned all that money and bought Rolls Royces and Ferraris always had a Mini as well. Whereas the other little cars weren't as cool. They're quintessentially British, you know, and I am too, so I feel quite proud of the Mini, as we all should as a country. It's a great car.
The media at the Paris Motor Show in September of 2000 finally got a look at the new Mini. After the speeches, the big moment. It looked like a lot of car for under $20,000. Now, the company had to build the cars and await public reaction. The new Mini would be manufactured at BMW Group's plant in Oxfordshire, west of London. As the car moved from computer sketches to the factory floor, BMW worked hard to ensure that exceptional quality standards were followed. The plan was to build 30,000 cars a year, but they could make 100,000 if sales took off. To help reinforce the Britishness, BMW claimed that about 40% of the car's content came from UK suppliers, but the engine was built in Brazil. The company had high hopes for their reinterpretation of a legend. They had to. Hundreds of millions of dollars were riding on this bet. As the car reached markets around the world, it racked up awards. The Japanese media named it the best imported car of the year. The American press gave it the 2003 North American Car of the Year award. It won over 30 other awards. The true test came when people went into dealerships and took a test drive. There was a buzz. People responded to the fun shape, the roomy interior, and the surprising performance. It was longer, wider, and larger than the original. Its muscular, attention-grabbing style was immediately recognizable as a Mini. It was like no other car on the road. For those who wanted more power, the company soon had the supercharged Mini Cooper S. This little rocket had a 0 to 60 time of only 6.9 seconds. The interior evoked Mini's rally heritage with a modern but minimalist instrument panel. Helping to move through the gears was a 6-speed Gertag gearbox and sports suspension. The look of this high-performance go-kart was enhanced by wide wheel arches, a roof spoiler, and a functional air scoop on the hood. It was an athletic and dynamic combination that appealed to the rally driver in everybody. Wherever it went, people couldn't help but stop and stare. It stood out in any crowd. It was unique. The real test was to see how it fared with classic Mini fans. They liked the bigger engine, the styling cues like the big round headlamps, the smiling grille, and the cheeky square shape that reminded them of their beloved classic. They weren't willing to forget about 41 years of motoring history and chuck their older cars. However, they seemed to be willing to give the new car a chance. The Mini is a reminder of why people like cars. In this age of oversized, aggressive road tanks, it's hard not to fall for the Mini. Whether you end up with a classic or a new one, you'll likely become a convert. They're good-looking charmers with plenty of performance, a great pedigree, and the ability to put a smile on anyone's face. As the Mini makers say, let's motor.